Some people claim that Anthem doesn't have a lot of diversity in its builds, but I disagree wholeheartedly. There's obviously an ideal way to play each of the Javelins, but branching off into something different can yield satisfying and effective results. Today we're going to look at a storm build that pushes our damage to shocking levels. Let's get started. Since the goal of this build is dealing massive damage, and I made a pun about shocking things, we're going to start with gear selection. I'll be using the Focus Seal, Stasis Chain, and the Blast Seal Venomous Blaze. Both of these abilities are neither primers nor detonators, but their damage is high. Stasis Chain, the upgraded arc burst, fires a blast of lightning after a brief charging period that arcs to 2 nearby targets. The additional effect, hitting enemies causes an electric explosion. Something important to note about this ability is that it can hit weak points. Next, Venomous Blaze, the upgraded Flame Burst, is a multi-charge ability that damages enemies in an area of effect. The additional effect, the acid status and acid damage, is applied to enemies after 3 consecutive hits. With 2 very high damage abilities locked in, it's time for us to select components that further increase our damage. First up is Gunslinger's Mark. This component increases ability recharge rate by 50% and reduces ability damage by 20%. That might seem like an odd choice for a build that's focused on dealing massive ability damage, but the reduction in damage is easily counteracted by a single well-rolled inscription, and the increase in ability usage makes it worthwhile. The additional effect on the Gunslinger's Mark increases weak point damage by 60% while hovering. This applies to our weapons and abilities, so Stasis Chain will get a nice boost if you hit the right spot. Next is where things start to get interesting. Mark of Ruin increases fire damage and effect by 5%, and while our Q ability Venomous Blaze recharges, our E ability Stasis Chain deals 40% more damage for 20 seconds. On multi-charge abilities, all charges need to be spent before the buff takes effect. To take the damage even further, I've slotted the Token of the Pupil. Its primary effect increases the number of combo chains by 2. This doesn't have a lot of value for us since we don't have any reliable primers in our build, and our only detonator is our melee. But its additional effect, hitting an enemy with our Q, increases our E ability damage by 60% for 5 seconds. And with that, we've created a basic rotation. We hit a group of enemies with Venomous Blaze, then we zap them with Stasis Chain. Our final components round out the build and give us a bit more damage. Token of the Master increases blast damage by 35%. Its additional effect, hitting an enemy with our E ability, increases our Q ability damage by 60% for 5 seconds, the opposite of Token of the Pupil. The blast damage buff increases the damage on Venomous Blaze, the proc effects on both of our abilities, and our ultimate, so it's touching most of our loadout. Next, the Token of the Daring increases elemental damage by 35%, but decreases physical damage by 35%. Its additional effect, a shield break, increases ability damage by 20% for 20 seconds. Finally, Emergency Power increases our ultimate damage by 30% and instantly fills our ultimate meter when critically wounded. This effect can occur every 120 seconds. Last but certainly not least is weapon selection. Weapon selection for the Storm can be a bit limited because the best choices are masterworks that increase stats while hovering or the Elemental Rage. For today's build, I'll be using the Avenging Herald, which increases my weapon damage by 200% while hovering, and my secondary weapon is a Stat Stick. Essentially, it has good inscriptions, but I won't be using it to kill enemies at all. Finally, my support ability is Quickening Field. Upon activation, players who enter the field have their gear recharge rates increased by 20% for 10 seconds. Alright, so like with every Storm build, there are a lot of moving pieces, but they're all moving in the same direction to make this build very powerful. Now let's get out into the field and test it out. Alright folks, for today's testing we're diving into a legendary contract on the Grandmaster 2 difficulty. Unlike the previous build, we're gonna have an interesting time. We don't have any crowd control, but we have a lot of damage, so it's really the exact opposite of what we were doing before. So we're going to be able to kill the enemies, but we're going to have to move around a lot in order to stay alive, whereas the previous build, the crowd control expert, as I was calling it, we're having trouble dishing out damage. So the basic rotation again is we're going to apply the Token of the Pupil boost, and then we're going to zap with Stasis Chain, and that's going to apply the Token of the Master. Then both of our abilities are going to have a damage buff. Now one thing that's important to consider, the Mark of Ruin damage boost only gets applied when all 5 charges of Venomous Blaze have been used. So if we want to get the full effect of our components, we have to use all 5 charges of Venomous Blaze and then try to keep Venomous Blaze kind of on cooldown, so it's very easy for us to maintain a 100% uptime on all of our buffs. So we never want to allow our abilities to fully recharge themselves, because that'll make it a bit more cumbersome for us to maintain that Mark of Ruin boost. That extra 40% is nice, and I want to keep as much damage as I can on my abilities at all time, because this build is all about those abilities and getting big damage on multiple targets at the same time. Now we've got a spawn coming, I think. Yes, we've got some outlaws on the field. So send out that first zap, and we see it hit multiple targets, doing some nice damage. Get that Mark of Ruin reactivated. As soon as he goes up in the air with his buddy, I'm gonna zap away his shield with the stasis chain to knock him down. Let's just go into the ultimate. We got a big grouping of enemies, and then we'll smash them all at the same time. Well, he's a little bit agile, but I had an extra rock for him. There we go. We've got another spawn coming, and I may as well resurrect my AI teammate. He's not doing all that much, but that's okay. So again, all of our cooldowns are coming back, so I'm going to have to spend all 5 charges of Venomous Blaze in order to get the Mark of Ruin boost, but that's okay. If I keep my distance, then I can be comfortable spending all of these charges without, you know, moving around. One of the main problems, I guess you could call it, with Venomous Blaze is that it takes a while to use all the charges. It's a bit slow, and it makes me feel a little bit like a sitting duck while I'm just standing there, sending out that fire. But if you keep your distance, it's not such a huge deal. Ooh, I'm taking a little bit too much damage because I'm talking too much, but emergency power gonna come into play, giving me my ultimate so I can use it to clear out some of these guys. Now I wanna hit that storm, but he's in a weird spot. I think, oh, he's just going left and right over and over again. Another thing that's really nice about this build is because we're using Stasis Chain, which is dealing lightning damage or electric damage, whatever you want to call it, enemies that have shields basically do not exist. We do crazy amounts of damage to them. So enemies like the Dominion Valkyrie, the Outlaw Valkyries, and just shielded enemies in general are not going to be a problem to us. If we were in a team, we would be able to shred those shields out so other teammates can start priming and doing combos. So this is a cool setup to play if you have a ranger as your friend and there's a lot of shielded enemies. You go in and you get rid of those shields, the ranger primes them up and detonates them and does his combo. The enemy is gone. Alright, for this final section of the contract, we have to deal with some Scar, and we're gonna see both the areas where this build excels and the areas where it falls a little bit short. If there are any more Scar enforcers in this section, we're going to see that lightning damage attacks deal less damage to armored enemies. So that's where we're going to struggle a little bit. But the fact that we have an Avenging Herald with us is going to make that a bit more tolerable. So there we go. We've got some Scar enforcers spawning. The acid going to proc on them, so I'll spread that to the surrounding enemies so they take additional damage from my attacks. And because we've got a large grouping, let's pull back a little bit, send out that zap, and do some damage. Now I'm going to have to pull away because I took a bit too much damage trying to be aggressive. And we'll just have to fight from range for a little bit. Our shields are back, and I'm very tempted to go in for a melee to spread that acid effect. I'm going to have to move around quite a bit. This is where we see, again, one of the weaknesses. We have no crowd control. So this large group of enemies, they're just going to keep firing at me. And there's nothing I can really do to stop them besides killing them. Emergency power coming into play again. Going to allow me to use my ultimate to clear out this large group. Alright, so we're not going to have emergency power or an ultimate to save our ass for a little while. But that's okay. I'll just have to play a little bit safer while that component is cooling down. Let's go ahead and use all of our charges there. Pull back, activate Quickening Field to reduce the cooldowns, and then start zapping from a distance. Did it get really dark all of a sudden? We got a hunter in the back. He's spraying and praying. I'm going to pull back here, give him a nice little zap so we don't get sniped. I'm going to have to get behind some cover. Alright, shields are back. Let's deal with the hunter first. Get rid of his shield. Now let's try and apply the acid status. There it goes. Just a little bit more. Bam. Knocked him down. Go in for the combo on that acid. And then one more zap and a couple of shots and he's gone. Alright, that got a little bit hectic and incredibly dark for a second. The lighting just went to shit. I guess it's nighttime in game. But that's pretty much the gist of it. We try to manage all three of our buffs and keep them running at the same time. And when we get overwhelmed in numbers, we just have to pull back. It's just the nature of the game. When you're not playing with crowd control, you've got to pull back. And you've got to fight from range. But these large groups, they get absolutely melted by our Venomous Blaze. The acid status that we get to apply is going to increase our damage dealt to single targets. And if we go in for a melee, we can spread that acid damage. That acid debuff, rather, to increase the damage taken from multiple enemies, and it feels pretty powerful. And we've got an Iskari to deal with as the final enemy. That's going to be a bit tricky, but we've got the tools at our disposal. So we've already applied the acid status, so let's get some damage on him. Let's spend all of our stacks of Venomous Blaze, keep that acid running on him. Go ahead and pop our quickening field to reduce our cooldowns, and we're gonna fight from range here. I'm not gonna go in and try and melee him. Unfortunately, this is outside of the effective range of the Avenging Herald, so we're not getting the full damage that we could be getting, but it's still enough. So we're just gonna keep that acid status applied as much as we can, so that the Iskari takes additional damage from our attacks. Dodging those missiles real quick, and then we continue pounding him. All right, we've got quickening field back, so we'll reactivate that. This is situations like this where you're dealing with a boss. I enjoy them a lot because you get to see the full rotation of a build. You get to see all the different elements coming into play, and how to manipulate them all. Oop, taking some damage. Got the missiles coming in at a bad time. Let's activate our ultimate. Wham! That was beautiful. And there we go. That's going to wrap up the build for today. This is a very stark contrast to what we had in the previous build. We were controlling the battlefield last time, keeping things locked down, but we couldn't really kill anything effectively or in a reasonable amount of time. And this go around, we are destroying everything, but we've got to be very careful. We've got to move around a lot to avoid taking fire from multiple enemies because we can't control them. So there are clear pros and cons to each of them, but when playing the Storm, dealing massive elemental damage is very satisfying. So I will say I do enjoy this build a little bit more, but there is tremendous value for both you and your team when you're going around freezing everything. So with all of that said, we're going to wrap things up here. So if you'd like to provide more support to the channel than you already do, just by watching, liking, subscribing, and commenting, you can head over to patreon.com/iBluairJgR to become a patron. As always, the name of the game is Anthem. The name of the channel is iBluairJgR. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.